All right, well, I'm going to first off welcome everyone for coming to the Hazard Mitigation Plan presentation. My name is Christine Flynn. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. And before I start, I wanted to thank our planning team, which was largely made up of town hall department heads as well as several members of the broader community. In addition, I want to talk to our planning project team manager, Martha Heavener from the Cape Cod Commission, who has led this process for the last year and a half. And so Martha is going to walk us through the plan, and so I'm going to hand it off to Martha. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christine. And we are here tonight, this afternoon, to talk about the Harwich, the 2025 Hazard Mitigation Plan. I'll just note that the town does have a FEMA-certified 2017 Hazard Mitigation Plan, and this is considered an update to the plan, and well, it's technically just an update. It actually is a full-blown new plan. And I'd also like to thank Christine and town staff. It's been so wonderful working with Harwich town staff. I was just saying a minute ago how impressed I am by the level of expertise of the town staff and also your spirit of collaboration. So it's been a good process. And with that, I was going to say I'll keep it informal and anyone can please interrupt me midway. So for the discussion this afternoon, I'll begin with just giving some background on the plan, a little introduction and why we do the plan, and then jump into the content, and give an overview of some of the key sections of the plan, and then wrap it up with next steps and take any questions or comments people might have. And so just to begin with, people often ask, well, what is a hazard mitigation plan? Is it an emergency management plan? And what does it entail? And so a hazard mitigation plan is a long-term strategy that the community develops to identify and reduce the risk of natural disasters that could affect the community, and also to keep the town or help the town be eligible for FEMA funding. And I want to emphasize that last piece of the FEMA funding. That really is a key motivator for all the communities I've worked with in doing the plan. Keeping a plan current and updating a plan keeps the town eligible for those funds. And the purpose of the plan is to reduce damages from natural hazards by implementing sustained actions to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life and property from hazards. And again, I want to make the distinction between an emergency management plan or an emergency preparedness plan. The hazard mitigation plan entails long-term strategies to keep the town's risk from hazards and their impacts minimized. And so I borrowed this slide from FEMA. It's a little dry, but the reason for it is I want to emphasize that both the plan content and the process are prescribed by FEMA. So this isn't Christine's or the town staff's idea of what should go into the plan or Cape Cod Commission's idea. It's a prescribed process that FEMA dictates through its hazard mitigation plan guidelines and requirements. And so if the town wants to get the plan approved by FEMA, we have to follow those guidelines and requirements. And the process begins with establishing a planning process where Christine just referred to town staff. We begin with forming a local planning team that is comprised of town staff and also a member of the community who's got connections to vulnerable members of the community. And also, so we take the planning team, we develop an outreach strategy, and we then move on and begin to assess the risk of the town. How is the town vulnerable to natural hazards? And that involves taking a look at the town's existing capabilities, like what does the town have in its capacity to address hazard mitigation, and also what are the hazards? How is the town, where and how is the town vulnerable to natural hazards? And we put all that together and we form a hazard mitigation strategy or mitigation strategy. And that strategy is comprised of goals and actions and an implementation plan. And then the town is charged with implementing that plan. And 5 years go by, and the town gets to do it all again and come up with another update. But that's the process. And again, I just wanted to emphasize, this is all dictated by FEMA requirements. And the next part I wanted to go through, just an overview of the plan content. I'm having a little trouble seeing the plan, but I think after all the slide, I think after all the work on the plan, I have it memorized. Thank you. So just the content of the plan is the same largely as the 2017 plan. So anyone who worked on or is familiar with the 2017 plan, this will seem familiar. Chapter 1 goes over the planning process. In Chapter 2, we look at the natural hazards, what's relevant to the town. And then Chapter 3 is an asset inventory, really a profile of the town that includes a look at, or really an inventory of town facilities, town people, infrastructure, and that sort of thing, town assets. And then the next chapter puts all that together. So in Chapter 4 is an actual vulnerability assessment where we look at which of those features, what in the town is vulnerable to the natural hazards, then put all that together. And Chapter 5 is the actual mitigation strategy that is composed of several different components, both including the goals of the hazard mitigation plan. It also looks at the 2017 mitigation actions and does a status review, like how did we do, where are we on those? Again, it looks at the town's existing capabilities, and then it also includes, most importantly, new actions for 2025. And then the following chapters are more administrative in nature. There's some guidelines for how the town's going to keep the plan current and how it is going to evaluate the plan over the next 5 years or so. And then a very brief section on how the plan gets formally adopted by the select board. And so the FEMA guidelines or regulations require that the town take a look at all the hazards that are in the state, the Massachusetts Climate Action Plan, Hazard Mitigation Plan, and see which of those are relevant to this community. And so this slide has a list of, or presents all the hazards that are in the Massachusetts Hazard Plan. And so this is the list, and on this list of these 14 hazards listed here, the planning team felt that all were relevant to Harwich except landslide and tsunami. And I'll say that this is pretty similar to all the other communities on the Cape. There's often been a question about, well, is landslide relevant to our town? And Harwich and other towns I've worked with have said, well, we've got erosion, we've got moving sands. It's not really landslide like out in California where there's mountainsides of mud coming down. So technically, the group didn't feel that landslides were relevant, and also tsunami. There's no history of tsunamis in Massachusetts. And so those are the hazards. And just to note, if you're interested in the difference between this and the 2017 plan, these are largely the same hazards that the state had in its plan and the town had in its 2017 plan. The difference is that with emphasis more, or I would say making more of an association to climate change, the state categorized the hazards a little bit differently and is tying them all to climate change. And you'll notice earthquake, which is considered a natural hazard, is considered a non-climate interaction. And I was going to say the only other difference is that the state added invasive species as a natural hazard for this plan. And so part of the outreach strategy, one aspect of it was to do a written survey, a public survey on natural hazards. And kudos to the town of Harwich, by far had the greatest participation, even than the bigger towns that I've worked with. And it's the same time, I remember in 2017, Harwich led the charge again with getting the highest amount of participation. So congratulations on that. And so one of the first questions we asked, wanted to hear from people, what hazards have you experienced? And there's really no surprises here. I know the slide may be a little bit hard to see, so I'll just, I think I know from memorizing, but storms, coastal storms, hurricanes, coastal erosion. I'm going to have to look up close to this here.
Do you want a copy, Martha? Here.
Oh, thank you. Or I can read it off of here. I just want to make sure I don't leave anything off. Hurricanes, tropical storms, tornadoes. So here's the difference for Harwich. A distinction here is that a significant amount of people in Harwich said they'd experienced a tornado. And people are nodding at the table. And yes, there was a tornado. Was it in 2019, I believe? And so this is also a distinction from the 2017 plan. I don't think anyone had noted that they'd experienced a tornado. But the rest of the hazards are things we can imagine: storms, hurricanes, nor'easters, coastal erosion being the top hazards that people experienced. And then we asked, which of the hazards are you most concerned about? And for this, the top concern was hurricanes and tropical storms, followed by coastal erosion and shoreline change, and then severe winter weather and nor'easters. So that makes sense, just since we were talking about tornadoes, that wasn't a top concern of people. So people have experienced it, but it's not their top concern. And then we asked people, what actions have you taken to be more hazard resilient? And what's interesting to me on this is that people actually are doing a lot themselves. A high number of people have pruned trees around their property, removed debris around their property, also done things to change the drainage patterns on their property, also signed up for emergency communication. Those are the top actions that people have taken to make themselves less vulnerable to hazard impacts. And then we asked the question, well, what would you like the local government to do to help protect the buildings and people from natural hazards? And on this, there are a lot of things that people felt the town could do. One of the top responses was to work on drainage on local roads, improve the drainage on local roads. Also, you can see from the list, which I'm having trouble seeing, would be to improve the drainage, also improve the alert system was a top one, remove debris and hazards, prune the trees on town property, also continue to work with regional partners to prepare for and recover from natural hazards, and also improve communications around natural hazards. That would be great, thank you. Just gonna switch seats. Thank you. So no real surprises there, but it looks like with the work that the town is doing, people want that to continue. And so next, I'll just jump to the mitigation strategy. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the mitigation strategy is composed of mitigation goals, existing capabilities, and I'll get into both of them in a moment, and then coming up with actions. And there's different types of actions. There's planning and regulation, there's structure and infrastructure projects, natural systems protection, and education and awareness type projects, or public outreach projects. And then finally, the other piece of it is implementation. And so just to go over briefly, the hazard mitigation plan goals are, I think they're identical to the goals of the 2017 plan. And the first is to reduce the potential for loss of life and damage from natural hazards. Next is to mitigate any financial losses from natural hazards. That would be to the community. The next is to reduce impacts to infrastructure and critical facilities. That is public infrastructure and critical facilities. And also, another goal is to position the town to be eligible for funding opportunities to help implement the hazard mitigation plan. Fifth goal is to ensure that the measures are sensitive to natural features, historic resources, and community character. And I remember when, in 2017, people on the planning team felt that this was an important goal to add. And the purpose of it was to indicate that the planning team felt that to be careful with the mitigation actions and ensure that they don't do anything that's really going to affect the community character and impact the cultural resources of Harwich as well. And then the next goal is to communicate local hazard mitigation planning activities with the state and regional partners and neighboring towns. And then finally, the last goal is to increase public awareness through education and encourage hazard mitigation as part of the overall municipal planning process. And that may seem a little bit, almost break them into two different goals, but the purpose of that is to both make sure that the town is working on educating people on hazard impacts and hazard mitigation, and then also incorporate hazard mitigation planning into really all aspects of town work. And so one requirement that FEMA wants to see in the mitigation strategy is for the town to examine its existing capabilities for hazard mitigation. Like, what is it that it can do, its capacity for hazard mitigation? What are the various elements, and to evaluate them? Like, how are they working, and where is it that could they be improved? And so we look at 5 different categories of the town's capabilities, one being town plans and policies that are related to hazard mitigation. So I know you just updated your local comprehensive plan, so that would be something to look at. Another plan might be an existing study like the low-lying roads plan or study, or a harbor management plan. Examine those. How are they effective in terms of hazard mitigation? Is there anything else you want to do? Also look at land use and building code, zoning bylaws and regulations, noting that we've got some Conservation Commission members here, so that's something to take a look at. Your wetlands bylaw, your zoning bylaw, flood zone, flood district, flood zone regulations, how are they working? Take a look at the staffing and boards. What is your staffing capacity and capability? Are there any changes that might help hazard mitigation? And just to note, something that's different from the 2017 plan, or something that I've seen in all towns that have done their hazard mitigation plans. Since 2017, we've had several towns say, we're having some staffing issues. And a lot of it has been tied to housing issues. Towns have been struggling to retain staff, and that has impacted, in some communities, has impacted their ability to work on hazard mitigation. And then look at your financial capabilities. How can the town fund hazard mitigation? That is often largely through grants, also community preservation funds, department budgets, et cetera. And then also take a look at the existing mitigation activities. So the town is already, every day in its work, doing hazard mitigation measures, such as there's tree trimming policy, there is public information available, or public outreach available, there is infrastructure evaluation, there is storm drain maintenance, et cetera. So the town already is doing a lot. Take a look at that. Where could these be perhaps changed or improved? And so next are the actual, so we put all that together. We look at the vulnerability assessment, we look at the existing capabilities, we look at the hazard mitigation goals, and we take all them and we come up with new mitigation actions. And for that, I'm going to pass it on to Christine, because I think you're more knowledgeable of
Yes, thank you, Martha.
your mitigation actions.
So I'm going to introduce Amy Uskowski, our other planning team member and conservation agent. So Amy, if you want to start with the natural systems protection.
Sure. So in this process, the team itself and also took the results of the survey to look at what we can do here right in Harwich to make us more resilient and what type of mitigation actions could we complete. And some are very specific, such as the first one. It's an actual single road. So design and implement options to address coastal flooding at North Road. This was part of the low-lying road study that was done and headed up by the Department of Public Works. So a section of North Road in particular becomes impassable at really high tides, making it really difficult for people to get in and out of their properties or for emergency vehicles to get in. So we are currently looking at options to address flooding in this area and to keep water from ponding. Actually, the first picture at the very beginning of this presentation of the house that was surrounded by water was at the low point on North Road that we were talking about. We are currently working with the Barnstable County Cooperative Extension and the Cape Cod Commission to collect and map data on beach area erosion. Their coastal processes specialist at the Cooperative Extension has been instrumental and very eager to get real data, current data on erosion using previous plans that the Conservation Commission may have seen for projects on the shorefront and comparing it to what we're seeing out there today. Conducting annual dredging of Allen, Witchmere, and Saquatucket Harbor entrance and the approach channels to improve navigation, public safety, and water quality. Conducting a financial analysis of potential benefits and feasibility of performing freshwater pond diagnostic assessments and monitoring for cyanobacteria in-house. That is something that our Natural Resource Director, Stephanie, is very involved with volunteers and PALS program. And our newly formed Harwich Ponds Coalition as well. So we have a lot of people very interested in the diagnostic assessments of our ponds. And setting aside purchase of land in or near the floodplain to plan ahead for the future of sea level rise. Does it go down or
To the side.
to the side? Okay, thank you. Let's see. These were collaborative projects as well to continue the design, permitting, and implementation work for the Herring River culvert replacement underneath Route 124. This leads into Long Pond, and this Herring River is one of the biggest herring runs in the state of Massachusetts, and to be able to pass fish effectively, the replacement of this culvert and the herring, this section of run needs a lot of work. And continue to install wastewater and stormwater infrastructure in planned locations, particularly in high groundwater areas. Though we see a lot of drought, specifically in the summers here, we're seeing episodic heavy rain events that are inundating our existing stormwater infrastructure, particularly in high groundwater areas, but really all over town. As our DPW director has said many times, in the past couple of years, he's seen water in roads in parts of town that they've never seen flooding before as a result of heavy rain events. So our stormwater infrastructure needs to be updated. Continue to repair and improve work, continue the repair and improvement work at Saquatucket Bulkhead, again, key for navigation. And use the recently completed culvert study prioritization list to pursue alternatives for repair or replacement to mitigate impacts, as I had said, from precipitation events. If anybody else on the planning team has anything that they want to add to this, because there are experts in the room on these topics, please feel free and just interrupt me.
I'll just jump in terms of the stormwater and infrastructure issues. The DPW director has also indicated that in the last 5 years, their budget funds and allocations for doing mitigation to do stormwater management has increased over the years exponentially from 5 years ago, where they would designate maybe $50,000 a year on road maintenance. Now, I believe that number has jumped to $350,000 annually in their budget. So, you know, when we talk about these fiscal implications, they're real, and they, you know, it requires a lot of resources from the town to manage these challenges.
And to piggyback on that, in addition, we're looking for more and more grant opportunities and received some grants for things like culvert replacement as well, such as the 124 culvert, as well as the culvert that's underneath Bank Street as well. So not just more money that the town itself is putting aside for this, but additional funds that we are seeking and being pretty lucky to receive to help these issues as well. Pass it to you.
Oh, thank you. So as Amy indicated, some of the planning work in some of the initiatives that have been identified in the plan have dealt with regulation, and I will say for conducting a sediment transport study was also identified with to work with neighboring towns to address shoreline change and erosion, accretion issues along Nantucket Sound. One comment I will make, our work with the Barnstable County Cooperative Extension as well as the Cape Cod Commission has been tremendous for the town's participation in the National Flood Insurance Program and our Community Rating System program as well through FEMA. And, you know, to really be eligible for these programs, having data is essential, and to doing this work and continuing our partnership with the Barnstable County Cooperative Extension and the Cape Cod Commission has been tremendous. Other planning initiatives relative to regulations for land subject to coastal storm flowage has also been discussed. In one item is to consider revising the town's floodplain zoning bylaw. I understand that the Cape Cod Commission has been working with the various towns on improving their floodplain zoning bylaws and best practices for communities to consider, you know, how do we want to regulate development that's within the floodplain. So,
Actually, a meeting on Friday.
yes.
Kickoff meeting for Harwich on Friday.
And as part of our coastal resiliency, it's part of our discussion in how do we want to manage these regulations and future land use development better. Moving on to education and awareness, developing a mental health response plan to address climate change and hazard events for stress and impacts to the community's well-being. This was a critical discussion by the planning team, and I have to give a lot of credit to Ashley Symington for identifying this issue and really working with vulnerable populations of our community who are underserved. And in this, you know, these stresses impact individuals of all ages, not just you know, the older segments of our population. It also impacts teenagers and children and families as a whole. So, you know, really conducting better outreach and looking for resources to provide supports to those members of our population is really important. Another aspect of education and awareness is to increase public health messaging, particularly related to extreme heat impacts, and identifying in designating backup cooling stations and facilities as needed. having these resources is essential to really help vulnerable segments of our population. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Martha.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yep.
So I think we just got a couple slides left. Oh, okay, we're already at the end. In terms of the process, our next steps are on Monday, December 8th. Christine, well, I believe, will be at the Select Board. One key step in the plan approval is to get the Select Board's blessing to submit the plan to MEMA and FEMA for their approval. So that's the next step there. Once we get that approval, we submit it to MEMA, and they sort of, I always think it's interesting, they go through the plan first and kind of comb through for any issues, and then they give the okay about our submitting it formally to FEMA. And then once FEMA gets it, they usually send it back with some recommendations for corrections. And then we make those corrections, and then we formally have the Select Board formally sign off once FEMA issues that approval. And just to note, if anybody's really eager and hoping that this is going to happen really soon, the FEMA process can be a little bit slow. It can be at least a good 8 weeks or so. But our job is to get it off to them and get a response. Oh, there we go. And so anyway, with that, that's the presentation. And there is a public comment period, or public comments can still be submitted just past the Select Board meeting. So the Select Board meeting will be December 8th. And we'd ask that any comments or edits or corrections, anything people want to submit them by December 10th. And that you can email them to Christine Flynn at Harwich. You can see the address up there, or look her up on the website. And that's it. And so thank you, and thank you, I was going to say, to the audience. And thank you, Christine.
Yes.
And others.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And if you have any questions of us or the planning team, don't hold back. Or if not, we can conclude the presentation. And I just, again, want to thank Martha Heavener from the Cape Cod Commission for facilitating this process, as well as the town's planning team. John, you raised your hand.
Questions, comments? I have.
Please.
First of all, it looked like an enormous amount of work, and it presented very coherently. I didn't get all the way to the end. I didn't get through all the actions at the end. Still a very interesting thing. One thing that I thought was only lightly touched on, which is a concern of mine, is electrical and communications infrastructure. And they were referred to in the document somewhere, I can't remember exactly well, like electrical infrastructure was referred to as a concern mostly about, I think, one substation in the town of Harwich. There's a big thing there over by Lothrop and Main Street. But electrical infrastructure is everywhere in town, and there really isn't much discussion of the impact of failures of any of that, or what the town should be doing to harden the electrical infrastructure. And the same thing applies to communications infrastructure. And again, there were a couple of items of communication infrastructure that were mentioned, which were cell phone towers. But they're hardly the only communication infrastructure we have in town. We also have cable everywhere, which most people in Harwich rely on for communication, for internet access and communication. And that really needs to be, I think, on the table for a risk, infrastructure in town that is at risk for any weather event. And what the town is doing about it, which might be only that the town is in constant communication with the utility providers, with Comcast, with Eversource. And tree trimming was discussed today, and that's part of trying to harden that stuff. I think there are probably other steps. I feel like it would be good to have those things as an explicit and prominent part of the plan. Because, and my sense is that we rely on them so heavily, they're all sort of background for us. We don't even think about turning the lights on or turning our computer on and being able to connect to the internet. It's more of a question is, what about high-impact, low-probability events? And there are things we don't really want to think about, like war. Years ago, there was a thing called civil defense, which was preparing people to deal with hostile circumstances. That is nowhere in this plan, and maybe that's not part of FEMA's charter, and that all trickles down from there, but as a town, I don't know, it's a point, I don't know whether it should be in here. I mean, and part of our vulnerability in Harwich, as well as the rest of Cape Cod, are two bridges that go over the canal. And I didn't see anything about that in here, and there are all kinds of ways in which those things could be compromised and which would make life extremely difficult for all of us. And I'm wondering, shouldn't that be part of this plan? Shouldn't that be at least referred to here? And shouldn't we be thinking about how we deal with a situation where all of a sudden that bit of shared infrastructure is unavailable?
Do you want me to I'll take a stab at it a little bit, trying to, the first, just to get to your first point about the electrical and utilities, absolutely, they're extremely important. In Chapter 3, and this is, you probably saw it, there is a list. We have to identify the town's critical facilities, and one aspect of them are critical, there's lifeline utilities, I think is the category they go into. So you noted there was a substation identified. There might have been some other aspects of the critical utilities. And then in the next chapter is an exposure analysis that identifies which of these critical facilities, and they also include, there's other critical facilities like key services, buildings, et cetera, town hall, the harbor master office, et cetera. And the next task is to identify where they interact with hazard impacts. So primarily we look at how vulnerable they are to flooding. And you can see that some of your critical facilities are in fact vulnerable to flooding. And there may be some others. So I'm not sure that, we should probably take another look at it. I'm not sure that we identify power lines going down individual roads, but we tried to identify sort of like the key aspects of the lifeline utilities. But we can beef up that section perhaps and certainly include your comment on that.
Martha, while we're still on
Yes.
that topic, can I ask a follow-up question on that? And this is just pure curiosity. Have you heard of any towns nearby that are working with the utility companies to pursue underground utilities?
Yeah, so I would say that in previous plans, maybe the 2017 plans and some earlier, some towns might have said, bury under cable, above ground cables, underground them where feasible. And I think when they did their evaluation, they saw that no one took action on that. We've all heard, the $1 million a mile, how expensive it is. So I think that has not been, I have not seen that in any recent plans.
So following up on Amy's comment, I forget the buzz phrase, but the town is spending a lot of money burying sewers. And every time a street is open, there's an opportunity to install conduit.
Yep.
And some towns actually take this approach. I don't know if anybody on Cape Cod. I've had discussions in the past about fiber optic installation with our former town manager and with people on the select board. And Joe specifically thought it was great to think about, while we're sewering, installing conduit for communication facilities. I mean, it would be great if we buried all electrical infrastructure. That's a lot more problematic than burying fiber optic cable. And we really should be doing that. And it's something that could feasibly be part of our planning process here. And it should be part of our planning process. Thank you for bringing that up, Andy. That wasn't top of mind for me, but that is definitely a thing that we should be, that the town and the county should be thinking about.
Well, if I might just add that I think coordinating any road work with other work that could be done, so for example, in our transportation plan, we often recommend that the towns coordinate any opening of the streets as an opportunity to provide a sidewalk in the right-of-way, or, provide a trail. Like the coordination of those projects is really key. So I agree with that. And we all know it's easier said than done, but I think you bring up a very valid point, especially as the sewers are going in. And the only other thing I can think of relative to that is, I remember at the county several years ago meeting with a private consultant on how to address the need to get our utilities buried. And in addition to the cost, what this person was telling us was that it's gotten way more complicated over the years with all the space that's needed for the various utilities that go underground, making space for the gas line, fiber optic cable, sewer, and there's some reluctance, some reluctance among those parties to figure out how to get all that done. Just noting that. It is one of the challenges for the town,
Thank
I
you.
think.
One more comment. I was smiling because, if you're wondering why I was smiling, I should say with your first comments.
Of course I was
Not
wondering why you were
not
smiling.
because I think that it's funny, but because you said, maybe not everybody thinks about that. We do at our building, because ours got struck by lightning this summer. And we actually did lose communication
Okay.
because our
Oh, yeah.
phone service
There you
is
go.
all via internet now.
Ah.
So when we lost internet, we lost phones.
So
And
your
we
building-
also have marine radios, and that is a primary means of communication
Okay.
for maritime emergencies, to which we are available to respond 24/7. So that was a big communication. So I believe, are getting a generator still soon, and that should
And I'll just jump
solve some of that.
just
but-
piggyback on what you said. It's interesting because in previous plans, towns were including in their actions obtaining generators, additional generators, and FEMA has suggested or indicated that they're not going to fund that sort of thing through the hazard mitigation plan, that there's other avenues for towns to get funding for generators. And so that's not in this plan, but the generator is certainly a good idea. And I also just wanted, while I have the floor, just to follow up on your question about other types of catastrophic events that could affect the town. And this plan is focused on natural disasters, and that's what the local hazard mitigation plans are. It's suggested, and the FEMA guidebook is aimed at the natural hazards. I remember in the 2017 plan, there was a concern about Pilgrim and why the plan wasn't addressing that. And at the time, we were guided by FEMA that this plan is for natural disasters. It doesn't mean that you can't add other things. Another community has added, following COVID, added something relevant to communicable diseases. But the planning team, following up on the 2017 plan, focused specifically on the natural hazards from the state plan. But a good point, though.
So does FEMA support goals that have to do with hardening of energy distribution systems and hardening of communication systems? Or is that another thing that they don't consider to be part of natural disaster preparedness?
Well, I wouldn't say they don't support it. I mean, I don't want to say unsure, FEMA, this or that, but it could be in the plan. Some activities or some mitigation actions might not be eligible for funding. But if it is a priority for the town, this is a local plan and it could be included. So it's your plan, and so feel free to put in what you want, I guess is what I would say. But we need to at least focus on the natural hazards for the FEMA funding part.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up?
Mm.
So, is there a particular reason why FEMA would not support putting generators into, town buildings or having that as part of an overall
Yeah.
plan?
Well, I didn't mean to suggest FEMA doesn't support it. It's that's a kind of action, it's more of an emergency preparedness action that is unlikely to receive funding from the types of grants that FEMA offers for hazard mitigation. There may be other grants that would be achieved perhaps through a local emergency plan, I can't think, comprehensive emergency plan that the police and fire do.
So it's more about funding than, not necessarily thinking it's a good idea.
Oh, yeah, it's not a subjective thing, good idea, bad idea. It's more of, in your local hazard mitigation plan, if you put that in as an action, that's not a hazard mitigation funding eligible measure. But it's not that they don't believe it's a good thing.
And then just as a follow-up to that, do all the public buildings in town have generators as a matter of course, or no?
No,
Almost.
I don't think so.
Almost all, except for.
we
Okay.
have, in town hall, we do have one, but it doesn't power absolutely everything,
Okay.
but it's enough to put the lights on.
And then, I was gonna say, for our other operations, like for natural resources, if the power were to go out at our propagation facility, we would drain tanks, and then if it were a prolonged outage, we would bring over a generator or other types of backup pumps to supply water, so we don't lose, thousands of dollars worth of seed in, the next few years of propagation.
So for instance, like if we were to have a natural disaster and we needed to open shelters, the community center, and I believe they're trying to make the new tech school again, the old tech school before it was rebuilt was a shelter. And that I believe they're trying to get that to be the case now too. But our other those type of buildings have larger systems that could be of use if a lot of the population needed to evacuate to them.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of communication, back
Yeah.
to John's
Yeah.
point as well.
Yeah.
And the town does have an emergency preparedness plan, so I think, to Martha's point, there are probably some best practices in action items that have been identified in terms of some of the needs for the town in preparing for an event such as what happened to the Natural Resources Harbor Master's office.
Your brand new building.
Good practice for emergency response, though. It's where that's where the other plan comes in. It's the after the fact.
Did anyone else have any other questions or comments?
There was, just to follow up again, there was the question about the bridges. And in your local hazard mitigation plan, under critical facilities, critical roads are identified. So, I think it's got Route 6, Route 28, portions of Route 28, portions of Route 6, Great Western Road, and a number of sort of key roads, local, and actually some of them are under the jurisdiction of Mass DOT. The bridges, I think, are are sort of beyond the local capabilities. So it is a good question. And they may be dealt with perhaps in the regional transportation plan and the regional evacuation plan, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
I think we got to get the bridges replaced. That's kind of the key. That's the hurdle at the moment.
Yes. All right, well, Martha, thank you again for a great presentation, and thank you to the planning team and for all of you who came out tonight for their presentation. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so this concludes our meeting.